Okay, let's see. Slides. See my blue screen?
Yep.
Okay. Come on now. Okay, so chapter 6 is dealing with neurological exams. So often we'll use a healthcare professional will basically do a neurological exam to kind of get an idea of what may be bothering a patient, or what, or generally what is a neurological issue that the patient has. And so from these neurological exams, they're really short, they're brief, they're to the point, and you can get an idea of what may not be functioning neurologically.
Mhm.
Okay. So oops, I got carried away. Okay, so we have, so the neurological exam is basically broken up into 5 major categories. It's technically a 6th one, but a 6th one kind of falls into another category. Okay, so we have the mental status, we have the cranial nerve, we have the motor exam, we have the sensory exam, and we have the coordination. Okay, the mental status basically is going to be looking at it's going to be looking at the effects of it's going to be looking whether there are issues with the cognitive functions. So we're looking at memory, orientation, language, speech, things along those lines.
Mm.
The cranial nerve is just going to be looking at, going to be basically functioning, testing the function of the 12 cranial nerves, and then the peripheral nervous structures afterwards, or the central nervous structures that are associated with those 12 cranial nerves. So, so that's going to be kind of involving, you know, our sensory and also our motor functions as well. We have the sensory exam, and that's just going to test our sensory, and then we're going to have the motor exam, which is going to basically test our motor functions that are going to be associated with the spinal cord. And then we have the coordination exam. And so the coordination exam also has another component called the gait exam, and looks at the motor function of walking. So coordination is just coordination, the movement or performing complex movements. Excuse me. Now, what can cause some of these neurological deficiencies? One of the major things is stroke. Are you familiar with what a stroke is?
Yeah, it's like blood stops going to the brain.
Yes, yes. So we're basically limiting blood flow, right? And so there's 2 types of strokes that you could have. And actually, I forgot one a little bit more. Okay, so the mental status is that's going to be primarily in the cerebral cortex. The cranial nerve, when we're looking at that, so we'll be looking at the diencephalon to the lower brain stem, and then basically the olfactory connection to the forebrain. Coordination, that's going to be in the cerebellum, and then our motors and sensory skills are going to be along the spinal cord. So now back to that stroke. So there are two types of strokes, right? So we have the hemorrhagic stroke, and the hemorrhagic stroke, basically, your blood vessels are damaged so much that you're getting, or so much damage or so much clogged that you're actually getting blood flowing into the brain cavity or into the cranial cavity. Okay, so if this happens, you often will get your brain blood barrier will also become damaged over time and can dissipate, and then that causes severe issues as well. So stroke can be pretty deadly. So the other type of stroke is a ischemic stroke. So this one, also the vessels are basically being clogged. And so an ischemic stroke you can have a transitional one that's happening like over a small period of time where you get a small clog, but eventually it goes through. But anytime that you get like that cloggage, right, it's going to cause deprivation of oxygen. And deprivation of oxygen, basically, within a minute or two, is going to start causing damage. After a few hours, you're going to start getting severe damage where you're going to start getting cell death. Okay, so with an ischemic stroke, so basically you're going to lose that blood flow, but it's going to be a result of either narrowing or blockage of the vessels. And over time, what happens is that those vessels will start to thicken. And then as they thicken, that is going to cause more issues, and that can end up leading to more of a drop of blood volume, and again, eventually leading to a hemorrhagic effect. Okay. So the other types of deficiencies, neurological deficiencies that you can occur. So there's stroke, there's blunt force trauma, there's neurological degenerative diseases, there's developmental stroke, blunt force trauma, neurodegenerative disorders or disease. Developmental disorders. Infection. Congenital disorders. Congenital disorders. Okay, so you're familiar with blunt force trauma, basically hitting your head on something.
Yep.
Can end up causing neurological damages, or having a pin stuck through the bottom of your face all the way through your head, such as Mr. Gage we talked about a few weeks ago. So neurodegenerative diseases, some of those are going to be like MS, Huntington's, ALS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. So all of those would be an example of neurodegenerative diseases. Developmental disorders would be like let's see, I can't even think straight right now. Also,
Autism?
what was that?
Autism?
Autism. Thank you. Autism. Thank you. So like the autism spectrum disorder. So, but like in the case of autism, they're not really sure what the effects are. They just kind of, at this point, they believe that there's like maybe a miswiring or the connections are not properly formed during development. And so, but it's not as well understood as some of the others.
Hmm.
And well, infection, some type of bacterial infection or something that'll lead to an autoimmune deficiency or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, my brain is not fully functioning right now. It's just at that point where it's like that crust. So I may be taking that Red Bull here in a second.
That's all right.
Okay. So there's this neurologist named Brodmann, and he basically kind of mapped out the cerebral cortex. He broke it down to about 50 different regions, and he did this like in 1909, and and it's basically held up to this point, So we still kind of use those regions, but we call them by their areas now rather than the numbers. Okay, so like for instance, oops. Okay, so for instance, we have regions 1, 2, 3. So basically, this is going to be your sensory and your somatic sensation. So that's going to be like your touch, vibrations, pain, temperature, body positioning. And so it's going to be pretty essential for those components. We have the area 4, which is going to be your primary motor context. Right next to area 4, we have area 6, which is it's the premotor context. And so often you'll have areas, say 1 areas. So here's 4, here's area 6. And so like right adjacent to area 4, you have 6, which also has to do with motor function, right?
Mm-hmm.
And see, what was the other one? We have area 22, which is responsible for primary auditory cortex. You have area, which can't really see, but area 20. So here's area 22, area 23 surrounding it. Now, in area 23 is responsible for processing the auditory information. Here we have area 17, which is the visual, primary visual cortex. Around it, we have area 18, which is responsible for processing the visual information. And so you'll notice like regions of the brain. So one part will be for that primary input, and then the other part will be for processing or things that deal with that primary input.
Okay.
Okay. So there are there are three types of processing regions. So in the cerebral cortex, one is called the primary. And so the primary is going to be responsible for, that initial processing, that initial sensory processing. Then you have the association. So that one is for further processing of like modulated or specific inputs. And then you have the integration. And the integration area basically is a combination of both. So it does a little bit of that primary function and then also the association function. And so it's more modular. And so you'll have, it's kind of like the point where the two actually meet. So, so a lot of the assessments of the cerebral function is going to be directed at cognitive abilities. So that's stuff like, as I said, orientation, memory, speech and language, sensorium, which is just kind of like your senses and stuff, and judgment and abstract reasoning. So with orientation, orientation is basically when a patient is going to be aware of where they're at. So, let's see. And memory is going to be largely a function of the temporal lobe, and along with some of the structures that are beneath the cerebral cortex, so such as the hippocampus and the amygdala. And so memory is actually going to be stored in the medial temporal lobe. And so one of the reasons that they were able to sit there and find this out, that there was a patient that was basically going through epilepsy, and then
Dr. Henry?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
I didn't fall asleep. I know I look like it, but I did. Okay, so there's a patient who basically was epileptic, and it was like in the 50s and stuff. As a result, they basically did a lobectomy, basically removing part of his lobe. And when they did that, it was part of his part of his frontal lobe, I believe. And I'll have to look to be sure. Or sorry, his temporal lobe, part of his temporal lobe. And when they did that, this individual, he basically was able to have short-term memories, but he wasn't able to have long-term memories, right? Or they also call them episodic memories. And so when they looked at it a little bit further, right, the short-term memories were able to be generated, but he wasn't able to sit there and do that transfer to long-term memory. It's not like he didn't have long-term memory at all, because he remembered stuff that happened before they removed the portion of his brain, right? So he was still able to remember those past events, but the ones that were before that event, you know? And so that suggested that those short-term memories, some of the ones that we keep, we transfer from the short term to a long term. So you remember going to the hot springs and stepping on a spider and then having to jump in the hot spring, disinfect it or whatever, so you'll have that memory embedded. But if your short-term memory doesn't turn into that long-term memory, then you don't keep it, you don't store it. And so lost the ability for those long-term memories. And that memory storage is basically used for the hippocampus, and then of course the medial temporal, which he was lacking.
So they removed a bit of the hippocampus.
Yeah,
I thought that was like deep inside the brain. Do they like?
it's underneath. No, they didn't take out a bit of his hippocampus. They took out a bit of his medial temporal lobe.
Oh, okay.
So no, the hippocampus is underneath, but memory storage is a combination. It's part of the hippocampus can affect storage of memory. So
Oh,
the
okay.
hippocampus is basically being used to go from the short-term memory to the long-term memory, right? So the hippocampus has an effect on short-term memory, and it also has an effect on long-term memory because it's that transition. It's like that connection between the two.
I see.
Okay. Okay, so we also have like speech and language is part of it's going to be part of the mental status exam. So they know that speech, so the ability to speak, is going to be associated with the BRCA area,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to understand speech is going to be associated with the Wernicke area. Okay, so this here is called the conductive. Not the conductive, conduction. Conduction area, and this area is going to be it's going to be the area that is used to go from that point of being able to speak to being able to understand what's being said or understand that speech. So if you screw this up, you screw both up, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you screw this part up, then you're not going to be able to talk. If you screw up the Wernicke area, then you're not going to be able to understand what's being said or language.
That makes sense.
Okay. Okay, so before we start on this, so the mental status, again, it's going to be looking at attributes of attention, memory, language, speech, sensation, judgment, abstract reasoning, and then also personality. We talked about Gage, who basically had that rod going up through his head, through his eyes, up to his head, and after he had that happen, his personality changed. He went from a responsible, hardworking man, and to a person who was, he drank all the time. He was lazy. He was, and so aspects of the personality can be assessed with the same process. And so it could be a result of a person going, being the nicest person you ever know to the meanest person that you ever know. Could be a result of a head injury, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that brings us to the cranial nerve. So when we talk about the cranial nerve, we have sensory nerves that we're going to be looking at. So we have the olfactor, we have the optical, and the vestibular cochlear nerve. So the olfactory is cranial nerve number 1. The optical is cranial nerve number 2, and the vestibular cochlear nerve is number 8. Okay, so one of the tests that they do when they're testing the cranial nerve exams is they actually have you test your eyes. You kind of do this all the time when you go and get your license, right? So yep. Cover one eye, read the bottom line. Cover the other eye, read the bottom line. Okay, so we know that, by doing these types of tests, we get an idea of how well a person's vision is. We also get an idea of their depth perception, and then not their field of view, though. Okay. So there are some studies that were done, and they had found that in a certain case where you have a tumor in the pituitary gland, in the sella turcica area or region, this pituitary gland was malignant and carcinogenic, and it actually, not carcinogenic, I can't even think of the word now, but basically it's forming a tumor, cancer cell. Mm-hmm. And it continues to grow, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And it grew so much that it was actually pushing on the optical nerve. So when it was pushing on the optical nerve, it started causing damage. And so that person would have tunnel vision. So they lost their sense of their field of vision. So it was solely focused on, what was directly in front of them, and that was it. And so they couldn't really see to the left, or really couldn't see to the right, but as a direct result of the tumor pushing on that. Okay, so by them testing it, you can have an idea of whether maybe you have a tumor developing in certain areas. Right?
Okay.
Okay. So similarly with the vestibular cochlear nerve, right? So that nerve is responsible for determining both the equilibrium and our auditory sensation, and that basically is going to be a connection that's going to be happening from the inner ear to the medulla. So you could get deficiencies if you have any damage to your middle or inner ear. And some of those damages, of course, like like the ones that we have mentioned before, they could be a result of, genetic disorders. They could be a result of, infections or trauma, being hit in a ear. When I was, I think I was in the second grade, it was either first or second grade. And one of my sisters is 2 years younger than me. One of my sisters is 4 years. The one that was 2 years younger than me actually stuck a raisin in my ear, when I was sleeping, and stuck it real deep in there. And for the first day and everything like that, it was just like everything kind of hurt, right? And then around the ear, I started breaking out, and then I started having trouble seeing as a direct result. And then, of course, I had trouble hearing. And so then my mom finally took me to the doctor. And then when she took me to the doctor, the doctor had looked, how they go through and they look in your eyes and all of that. So they were basically giving me the neurological exam, like touch me here, touch me there, and then finally he got to the ear component, where the first thing that he did was look at the ear, and he saw that there's blockage. And so he went in with, a pair of tweezers, and he was thinking that it was probably like a whole bunch of wax that had been stuck up. We used Q-tips and everything like that, and we pushed the wax in, and he pulled it out, and then I could hear fine. And then I also had stopped having issues with vision and breaking out. So
Was it like immediate, or
it wasn't immediate. It actually took about a week and a half or two before it actually normalized. So often in terms of the ear, so the test they typically do is the Vine test. So basically you use a pitchfork, and you know what a pitchfork is? That vibrates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So they use that pitchfork, tuning fork, and then that is going to be a way of determining whether or not we can hear through the conductive hearing or the sensory nerves hearing. So to help us. Okay. There's also gaze control. So you know how your eyes go through rapid eye movement?
Mm-hmm.
Typically, so if it's some type of stimuli, you go through that rapid eye. And that rapid eye movement is called let's see, saccade. I guess saccade. Let me see. Okay, yeah. So saccades are just basically, like I said, it's that rapid eye movement that is a result of a visual stimuli. And so in this case, a large part of it is going to be bumpy. Like, have you ever had that happen? Can you hear me?
You sort of cut out.
I said, have you ever had a case where your eye is jumpy? Kind of like flex a little bit?
Yes. I think 4th grade, I was very malnourished. And that would happen quite frequently.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So was that by choice?
Stupid kid choice, yeah.
Kid choice. Oh, you don't want to eat anything. I don't want that.
But lunch was completely free in elementary school. No payment, nothing. It was just my own dumb choice.
Okay.
But yeah,
okay.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's an example there, right? So, and so, like you said, typically it gives you a sign that there's something wrong, something that's affecting the nervous system. If you're starting to get some type of degradation or deteriorating effect going on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and we've kind of talked about this, the vesicular optical reflex, where our eyes are basically compensating for our head movement.
Yep. Oh, Dr. Henry, I think you froze. I don't think I can hear you either. Hello, can you hear me? Oh, I'll be here waiting. Oh crap. Okay, so we were talking about rapid eye movement, and then we were talking about eye compensation movement. I'll be here just in case. Wait, did I leave? Hold on. Let's end the meeting.